Black MAGA, black conservatives are telling us that Pharaoh and Egypt were not all that bad. They're saying our families were better and our money was better under Pharaoh. But we must tell them, no, we are not fools and we're not going back to Pharaoh. God has brought us too far to look back now. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing until we reach the promised land. Dr. King told us he saw the promised land and he saw that we will make it to the promised land. So now is not the time to look back. Stay tuned and I'll tell you why we can't go back and how we can avoid going back. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Each and every week, we bring you at least one legal analysis of some trending story having to do with politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell so we can keep bringing you these powerful and informative videos. All right, so we cannot go back. No, we can't go back. We can't go back. We can't go back. We can't go back. If we were in church, I would tell you to look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, we can't go back. No way. We're not going to go back. We're not even going to look back, right? We're going to keep moving forward. All right, now, before we get into this, go ahead to Amazon, grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice, if you have a young boy in public school. And I can tell you right now, if you do, I assure you that he is being mistreated just because he is an African-American male. And you need to know how he's being mistreated, and you need to be prepared and ready to become his strongest advocate. Otherwise, I'm telling you, you're not going to like what the public school system does to him. I assure you of that. Okay? So go and get a copy of my book, Education and Justice. All right, now, this is Juneteenth month. We are about a week away from Juneteenth, the Juneteenth holiday. And the title really of this message is, Let's Celebrate Juneteenth by Protecting Civil Rights. Why must we protect civil rights? Because we got to have civil rights in order to demand civil rights. We got to have equal rights before we can demand economic rights. So we cannot, for example, vote the couch and do that sort of foolishness and lose what civil rights we have remaining, thinking that we are then positioned to demand civil rights. We're not. So I'm hearing folks all over YouTube saying stuff like, well, just vote the couch. But in the meantime, be doing this, be doing that, be doing this while you're voting the couch. That is preposterous. That is ridiculous. We're not going to be able to do anything if we sit back, vote the couch, and do not protect civil rights. Because civil rights are what gives us access to wealth, opportunities. And if we sit back and do nothing and allow Trump to win and put more folks on these federal courts, I even heard somebody say, well, it's going to be bad for black folks whether Trump wins or Biden wins. Well, let me tell you this. First of all, that's not true. Because if Trump wins, we may not even have a country by the time he's finished with it. And besides, Biden is not packing the courts with right-wing judges. He's not doing that. He's not behind your back, smiling in your face, and behind your back, undoing all the civil rights that we have gained over the years. He doesn't have Project 2025 behind him who are unraveling civil rights. No, Biden and Trump are not equivalent. That is a lie, a white supremacist lie that unfortunately black people are telling you. But remember a video I did some time ago? You can't be pro-black and pro-Trump. You can't be pro-black and pro-MAGA. You can't be pro-black and pro-vote the couch. You can't be pro-black and pro-GOP because MAGA, GOP, Project 2025, Donald Trump are determined to stop black folks from achieving full equality. And it does not matter one bit that they have black people out here telling us that they mean us some good. I heard Byron Donalds say a couple of days ago in a video that what black men want more than anything else is generational wealth. And I'm thinking to myself, how are we going to get generational wealth by hooking up with the people who have been trying to block us from having generational wealth ever since we've been in this country? The GOP is not interested in black people having generational wealth. The GOP is in competition with black folks. The GOP is trying to hold on to its wealth, white power, white privilege. So how does it, just use your head, just think about common sense. How and what will Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mike Johnson and Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, what are these people going to do to help black folks generate generational wealth? That's not their goal. That's not their platform. That's not what they are in Congress to do. That is crazy. Now, if you want to go over there and do like some of the black conservatives have done, that is get out here and cap for the GOP, for the Republican Party, then yeah, they'll set you up to do that. They'll give you money to do that. They'll roll out the red carpet for a black person who will come out here and say the things that some of these conservatives are saying. Yeah, they'll promote you. They'll put you in high places. They'll give you positions, right? Give you a white woman for you to get out here and just keep saying those things that we keep hearing them say. Oh, come on. We're not going to fall for that. We're not going to fall for the okie doke. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mitch McConnell and all the rest of them are not interested in black people having generational wealth. They never have and never will. Never have and never will. All right, now, one of the basic things that Republicans, conservatives, MAGA want black people thinking is that the policies of the Democratic Party, and I say this every time, I have to be specific. I'm talking about the Democratic Party of today, not that Dixiecrat Democratic Party that was pro-slavery. Not that Democratic Party. That is not the Democratic Party that we're dealing with today. The Democratic Party that we're dealing with today consists of mainly progressives, right? Who are not opposed to black progress, who are not opposed to blacks building wealth. And the Democratic Party today has enough blacks in it to have a say-so, to force the Democratic Party to adopt certain things. This is a very, very, very different Democratic Party than the one back during slavery. And the Republican Party today is very different than the one that was back in slavery. The Republican Party during slavery was the so-called Party of Lincoln. They were called radical Republicans. They fought to abolish slavery. They gave us the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. That Republican Party is a completely different Republican Party than the one we have today. The one we have today is filled with Dixiecrats and Confederates. Trent Lott told us that when he said in 1984 that the GOP was the party of Jefferson Davis. Go look up who Jefferson Davis was. Now, one of the things that they like to say is the democratic policies of the 20th century, 21st century, harmed black people. Now, I showed you in my very last video that is a lie. I showed you that blacks benefited from the New Deal, from FDR's program of dealing with the Great Depression. He didn't necessarily target black folks with the New Deal, but black folks benefited greatly. And the Great Society that Lyndon Johnson created, that benefited blacks tremendously. And it broke the back of Jim Crow. So how is it that we didn't benefit from the New Deal or from the Great Society when those things help black folks and continue to help black folks today? So like if you or your elderly relative, your grandmother maybe, has Medicare, or if you have Medicaid, those are policies that were promoted and pushed by the Democratic Party. If you have Social Security, if you're getting a Social Security check, again, those are policies that were pushed by the Democratic Party, as well as the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, which enables us to live wherever our money can put us. Those are Democratic policies that broke the back of Jim Crow. All right, so now if we look at this graph, I tried to illustrate that from 1920 to 2020, 100 years, we see here that the poverty rate for black people dropped substantially. And especially around 1940, 50, 1940, if you look at 1920, 1930, the black poverty rate was through the roof. And then if you look at 1940, right after the Great Depression, because blacks were able to eventually, and they tried, a lot of people, a lot of Southern whites, a lot of Dixiecrats tried to stop black folks from benefiting from the New Deal, but eventually, with the help of progressives, blacks were able to start enrolling in some of these programs, and that helped start to bring down black poverty. And then if we look in the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, we know that Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, signed the Voting Rights Act, signed the Fair Housing Act, which just opened up all kinds of doors and opportunities for Black America. What happened as a result? Poverty continued to drop. Poverty continued to drop. And then 1980, 1990, the poverty rate still dropping right on and through today. And the work that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have done to reduce poverty has been tremendous. And you do your research. I'm not saying this because I'm a spokesman for the Democratic Party or because I'm getting paid to say this. I don't need to get paid. I do my research. I'm just telling you the truth. I'm telling you what has been best for African American people from an economic and from a civil rights perspective over the last 100 years. And it has not been the Dixiecrats who currently make up the Republican Party. All right? So civil rights precede or come before civil rights. We were not able to start coming out of poverty until we started having equal opportunities. We were not able to start breaking the back of poverty, coming out of poverty, until we had more rights under the Constitution. You're not in a position to demand anything if the man has his foot on your neck. So passing the Civil Rights Act, passing the Voting Rights Act, passing the Fair Housing Act, passing the Elementary and Secondary School Act, these things were critical to Black folks starting to come out of poverty. And that poverty rate, you see it right there, started reducing dramatically because of the policies of Lyndon Johnson and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's just the truth. Those are the numbers. Those are the facts. So again, equal rights precede economic rights. Civil rights precede civil rights. Now, I want to turn my attention to Justice Clarence Thomas. Justice Clarence Thomas. He has been a total menace to civil rights. And that's why I'm turning my attention to him. Now, I'm an attorney. I am licensed by the State Bar of Texas. And one of the things that we cannot do as attorneys is be untruthful, to be unfair, to be condemnatory of a judge. And I'm going to abide by that. I'm not going to say anything about Justice Thomas that is not true, that is condemnatory. I'm not going to do that. It's not my place to do that. But fact is, he has been a total menace to civil rights. A total menace to civil rights. That's factual. That's factual. And I'm going to show you that. Now, this is what the big talk has been about. The fact that since Justice Thomas has been on the court, that he has received reportedly $4 million in gifts from rich GOP donors. All right? And you see from this graph here, he received a lot more by far than all the rest of the justices in recent history. I mean, by far. I'm not going to draw any conclusions or any inferences about that. I'm not going to call Justice Thomas' character and integrity into question. You draw whatever inferences you want to draw. I'm going to focus on what he has done as a justice since being on the Supreme Court. And it's been bad for civil rights. It's been really bad for civil rights. So the effect of Justice Clarence Thomas, a conservative African-American jurist, on SCOTUS is threefold. He's erasing Justice Thurgood Marshall's civil rights legacy. Justice Thurgood Marshall was the very first African-American to serve on the United States Supreme Court. By the way, he was nominated by who? Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson nominated the very first black person to sit on the United States Supreme Court. And he came in fighting just like he did as an attorney. He came in fighting for civil rights. Remember, he was the lawyer that led the team that got the Plessy v. Ferguson case overturned and the Brown versus the Board of Education case. He got the court to rule in that case that segregation was inherently evil, a unanimous decision. That was huge for him and his team to accomplish that during that day. I mean, that was one thing that white segregationists, white supremacists did not want. They did not want their children in the same classroom with African-American children. So that was a huge, huge, huge victory. So when Justice Marshall was appointed to sit as one of the justices on the court, he brought his tenacity and his fight for civil rights with him. And so he fought and he fought and he fought. And then he became of age where he needed to retire. And it was Justice Clarence Thomas who was nominated by the first Bush president to replace Justice Marshall. And trust me, it has been horrible since then, quite frankly, in the sense that Justice Thomas has been consistently siding with the folks on the court to undo civil rights. So he is erasing Justice Marshall's civil rights legacy. He's also enabling an anti-civil rights agenda. He is enabling an anti-civil rights agenda with his court opinions, with his concurrent opinions, with his dissenting opinions. He is giving them the ammunition to advance an anti-civil rights agenda. He's also giving them absolution. He's saying to them that you're doing the right thing, white supremacists. You're doing the right thing, white conservative, to wipe away civil rights laws. And because it's coming from a black man, that means a lot to white conservatives and to white supremacists, because it is coming from a black man, so it must be okay. What's the old saying? They'll send one to get one. So they sent Justice Thomas to get civil rights. And so he's enabling the right wing to dismantle the civil rights agenda. And he's equipping an army of anti-civil rights legal professionals. Now, how is he erasing Thurgood Marshall's civil rights legacy? Let's start that by learning a little more about Justice Marshall. He was born in Baltimore, Maryland. He attended Howard University School of Law. He was mentored by Charles Hamilton Houston, who was the elderly lawyer who was giving Justice Marshall guidance and so on. And they kind of worked together. They would travel the South and find little cases they could use to just kind of whittle away at segregation, Charles Hamilton Houston, go look him up. Again, Justice Marshall's mentor. He led the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, and there he had a team of lawyers, and it was that team of lawyers who got the Brown versus Board of Education case done. So essentially, Justice Marshall used the law to fight white supremacy. He used the law to dismantle Jim Crow. I know he would be rolling over in his grave right now to know that there are some black people who are out here saying, implying, or inferring that Jim Crow is somehow a good thing or was a good thing. I mean, he literally was in the courthouses down south, here in the South, fighting these battles against Jim Crow. Literally. Little case here, little case there, little case here, little case there. Establishing civil rights for the nation, for African Americans. And then his, again, most famous case was the Brown versus the Board of Education case. Now, here's what's really, really important. Justice Thomas recently criticized the Brown case in a recent case having to do with racial gerrymandering. I'm going to read a quote from that case from his opinion here in just a second. And in the past, he has also spoke disparagingly against the Brown decision. So he came on the court, Justice Thomas, to undo the legacy that Justice Thurgood Marshall had established. And he was also, Justice Marshall, he was the chief nemesis of Chief Justice William Rehnquist, who was extreme right-wing, very much to the right, and he was able to lead the court in a very, very conservative direction. Very conservative direction. And cases that William Rehnquist wrote or convinced the court to hand down to rule in a certain way, they still haunt us today. As we are in court, in federal court, Chloe and I and other lawyers fighting for civil rights, as we file cases on behalf of our clients who have been discriminated against or who have been the victims of police brutality, we run into cases that Chief Justice William Rehnquist authored or caused to happen that have language that makes these cases very difficult. Very, very difficult. It was Chief Justice Thurgood Marshall who fought William Rehnquist. He fought against the direction that William Rehnquist was taking the Supreme Court. Now, so Justice Thurgood Marshall, we know him for Brown. We know him for being the first African-American on the court, but he was doing some serious work fighting against white supremacy from being deeply embedded into the law. And you see, let me explain something to you. Critical race theory. You've been misled about what critical race theory is. You have been told that critical race theory says that every white person is evil. Every white person is racist. That's what you've been told about critical race theory. Critical race theory, hear me closely, started in law schools by law professors. Professor Derek Bell was the founder of critical race theory, a Harvard law professor. And basically what those lawyers and law professors did was they said, if we have the Voting Rights Act, if we have the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, et cetera, why do we still see a lot of racial discrimination? So it was a critical look at the law. Why do we still deal with many of the same issues that we dealt with 100 years ago if we have these laws on the book to protect black folks? That's the basic question that critical race theory asks. We know what happened. White conservatives co-opted the term, twisted it up, and some of you even joined forces with them in saying that critical race theory was being taught in high school and middle school and saying basically that all white people are devils. No, critical race theory was, again, being taught in law schools. And again, the question was, why are we still seeing racial discrimination? Why? And some of you have that question, and it's a legitimate question. You could be saying, Mr. Corbett, if the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all of that is so important, why haven't black folks done even better? Well, first of all, let's keep it real. Black folks have done a lot better. I'm going to go ahead and bring this graph back up, okay? So we need to see here that black folks have done a lot better. First of all, let's be honest about that. Because of the Civil Rights Act, because of the Voting Rights Act, because of the Fair Housing Act, because of the policies of LBJ, because of progressives in Congress, black poverty dropped substantially since the 60s. It wasn't because of GOP policies, because they've been fighting us. So let's acknowledge that. Let's acknowledge there has been lots of progress. We defeated Jim Crow, but we still don't have full equal rights. Why do you say that? Because of systemic racism, education system, in the criminal justice system, in the court system, in the healthcare system, in the corporate system, that still produce these disparate numbers for us. Now, I know you've been told, no, that's because of black culture. That's what black conservatives tell you, and white conservatives. They deny that there's any systemic racism. Well, they're lying. The data is overwhelming. And so critical race theory basically was saying, why are we still seeing these disparate outcomes and numbers when we have these race-neutral laws on the books? We've changed the law. Why are black folks still only have less than 4% of America's wealth when we are 13% of the population? Why are we disproportionately imprisoned? Critical race theory was criticizing and asking those questions. And let me tell you what a lot of it has to do with. Has a lot to do with judges in federal courts, because they're the ones who make the decision. For example, Fearless Fund. My daughter Chloe did a tremendous video explaining how two federal judges sent shockwaves through Black America when they ruled that a Black venture capitalist company could not give money to Black women who were being denied money from other venture capitalist companies. We're only getting 1% of money to start businesses, to fund businesses. Black people were only getting 1% and still only get 1% of the money from venture capitalist companies. So these two sisters, these two brilliant Black women said, then we'll do for ourselves. Isn't that what they tell us? Pull yourself up by your bootstrap. Isn't that what Black conservatives say? Do for self. Well, that's what these women were doing, and two federal judges said that they were discriminating against white people by giving loans and money, grants, and so forth to African-American business owners, African-American women especially, to Trump-appointed lawyers. So a big reason why we see, despite the laws on the book, Blacks still being dealt with unfairly is because of the judges that the GOP presidents appoint, and none of them appointed more judges than Donald Trump. Donald Trump, over 230 extreme right-wing judges. And when I say right-wing, I'm talking about judges who are anti-civil rights. So we just talked about how Justice Thomas has been erasing Justice Marshall's civil rights legacy. Let's drill down into that a little bit more. Justice Marshall wrote in a case named Regents of the University of California versus Bakke. Listen to what he says. He says, it is more than a little ironic that after several hundred years of class-based discrimination against Negroes, the court is unwilling to hold that a class-based remedy for that discrimination is permissible. Now, this has to do with the so-called colorblind doctrine, something that Clarence Thomas pushes in a tortured way, if you will. And let me explain to you. Justice Thomas, in fact, let me find his own words, if you will. Justice Thomas said in the case that overturned affirmative action, he says, I write separately to offer an originalist defense of the colorblind Constitution, to explain further the flaws of the court's Grutter jurisprudence, to clarify that all forms of discrimination based on race, including so-called affirmative action, are prohibited under the Constitution, and to emphasize the pernicious effects of all such discrimination. Now, let me explain to you what this debate is all about, because it is raging. It is raging in our country. We know that Dr. King, in his I Have a Dream speech, said that he wanted his 4 children to be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. All right? Don't judge my kids. Don't mistreat my kids. Don't discriminate against my kids on the basis of their race. Rather, treat them on the basis of their character. Now, what he was saying is, don't use my children's race or any Black person's race, again, to do them wrong, to deprive them of some benefit. What he did not and was not saying was you cannot take race in consideration when you are trying to remedy or repair race-based discrimination from the past. Yet, white conservatives have twisted this whole colorblindness, and Black conservatives, to say that the law does not permit for race to ever be taken in consideration, even if it is to repair what has been done to Blacks because of race. So that brings me, for example, to reparations. That is one of the legal doctrines that conservatives will use to fight against reparations. Giving black folks reparations, they will argue, violates the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, because it discriminates against whites, Asians, and everybody else. They will say that the Constitution is colorblind, so you can't use race to either deprive blacks of a benefit or to give blacks a benefit uniquely. So that's how Edward Blum is out here able to get these corporations shut down, affirmative action shut down, by saying you're violating the colorblindness doctrine by giving black folks a special benefit. But it's not a violation of the Constitution, because the Constitution was amended to include equal rights, which includes taking race into consideration to repair the damage that blacks have suffered. Let's look at some of the other Supreme Court justices' opinions on this very topic. There was Justice William Brennan. He says, in that same Regents of University of California versus Bakke case, he says, government may take race into account when it acts not to demean or insult any racial group, but to remedy disadvantages cast on minorities by past racial prejudice. So he agreed with Justice Marshall that race can be used to remedy, there it is, disadvantages that were cast on minorities by past racial prejudice. White conservatives argue no, because that's discriminating against some other racial group. Now, they use race to discriminate against blacks for even to now. But when we demand reparations because of past injustices, that's going to be the first thing they argue. That's violating our constitutional colorblindness standard. And Clarence Thomas is going to be the one to lead that argument. So that is the tension that is currently on the Supreme Court now between Justice Thomas and Justice Jackson, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Let me show you what she said, because she's the one now who's fighting this fight against Clarence Thomas. She said, 350 years ago, the Negro was dragged to this country in chains to be sold into slavery. Uprooted from his homeland, thrust into bondage for forced labor, the slave was deprived of all legal rights. It was unlawful to teach him to read. He could be sold away from his family and friends at the whim of his master. And killing or maiming him was not a crime. She said, our country has never been colorblind. Given the lengthy history of state-sponsored race-based preferences in America, to say that anyone is now victimized if a college considers whether the legacy of discrimination has unequally advantaged its applicants fails to acknowledge the well-documented, quote, intergenerational transmission of inequality that still plagues our citizenry. Now, let me tell you this. You know how we celebrated Jasmine Crockett for standing up to Marjorie Taylor Greene? We need to be celebrating Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson even more, because she is fighting a tough fight, primarily, but not exclusively, against Clarence Thomas, who has been, as I said earlier, a menace to civil rights. But she's fighting him. Finally, there's somebody on the court fighting this guy. And who made that happen? Joe Biden. Joe Biden. Joe Biden nominated and got appointed the first black female on the United States Supreme Court, which undermines this whole thing about Democrats ain't never done anything for blacks. You got to be kidding. I'm showing you the receipts. As I showed you, 2 Democratic presidents, and that's just those 2. I ain't even talked about what Jimmy Carter did. I ain't talked about what Barack Obama did, who, if nothing else, the Affordable Care Act ensures even to this day, millions of African-American people, 3-4 million of African-American people have affordable health care right now because of Obama. So I haven't talked about Jimmy Carter. I haven't talked about Harry Truman desegregating the military. I haven't talked about all of that. And so when folks say the Democrats have done, I haven't talked about Bill Clinton, putting blacks on the court. And so I could go on and on. They're literally telling you lies. So thankfully, Joe Biden put this fighter, this shero, this warrior on the court, who is now confronting Clarence Thomas, trying to stop the damage he is doing to civil rights. And I shout her out. I shout out Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Absolutely. All right. Okay, let's keep going. Now, how is Justice Thomas enabling an anti-civil rights agenda? Well, a little background on him. He was born in Pinpoint, Georgia, reared by his strict grandfather, attended Yale Law School on the affirmative action program. So what he criticizes today is what got him where he is. At one time, he flirted with the Black Panther Party. He became a black conservative, served in the Reagan and Bush administrations, and he adopted an anti-civil rights ideology. He became, in fact, a fierce anti-civil rights advocate. And as such, he became an anti-civil rights enabler for many. As an enabler, he gives anti-civil rights opponents the legal power, the capacity, and or the sanction to reverse civil rights legislation by excusing anti-civil rights practices, policies, and patterns, and absolving anti-civil rights advocates of their harmful results on blacks. It is powerful for white conservatives to have a black conservative tell them that what you're doing is right, to dismantle civil rights, to oppose black progress. That's right. You're doing the right thing. Keep doing it. I heard Ben Carson say to a group of white people, slavery wasn't all that, you all, so it wasn't that bad. Can you imagine a black man telling white people that slavery wasn't all that bad? But that's all those white people need to hear to continue their anti-blackness. So Justice Thomas has been a total menace to civil rights. So now the question is, how does he equip anti-civil rights advocates? He does so in many ways. By the way, equipping means to prepare and make ready. So how is he preparing and making ready anti-civil rights advocates? Well, remember, Justice Thomas hires clerks every year and has been doing so now for quite some time. And some of these clerks that he hires are hateful white supremacists, like Crystal Clanton, who wrote, "I hate black people." This woman here, he hired her as one of his law clerks, and she admittedly wrote, "I hate black people." And he still hired her to be one of his law clerks. But not just people like that. other white lawyers, professors, judges, and so forth, he equips them with his majority and concurrent opinions that includes language that supports attacks on civil rights. For example, take Laura Ingraham. We know that she's on Fox News every day almost, sprouting a bunch of anti-civil rights rhetoric. And then come all the way across the top to the far right, and you'll see Judge David Strauss. And he was one of the federal judges who recently handed down a case that said that blacks cannot sue under the Voting Rights Act for voter suppression. And then if you come down just below him, you'll see John Eastman, who is one of the attorneys that was indicted with Donald Trump in Georgia. And I'm pointing to others there. You see Senator Mike Lee down on the very bottom row and others. But these lawyers and judges and so on are people that clerked, all of them clerked for Justice Thomas. And they are out now in the country promoting and executing an anti-civil rights agenda. See, that's really important because when we lawyers are writing briefs or writing motions, writing petitions or complaints, we must cite the law. We got to go find cases that contains language that supports our position. So for those who are anti-civil rights, one of the best sources to find that law, that case law, that language, is to study Justice Thomas's opinions on civil rights. And again, because it's coming from a black man, it has even more force. The white supremacists can basically say, this is not me. This is coming from a black man. I mean, why are you mad at me? This is what Clarence Thomas says, or Byron Donalds, or Tim Scott, Candace Owens, Shelby Steele. This is what they're saying. Glenn Lowry. They're saying these things and defending these statements. So now white conservatives got cover now. They got cover to be anti-civil rights advocates. All right? That's how he does that. So the result are decades of, all this case law that enables these anti-civil rights judges, lawyers, politicians, business people, and others to fight, to push and promote an anti-civil rights agenda. Now, I told you earlier that I was going to show you what he said in a recent case criticizing the Brown case. I don't have that teed up, but he essentially said that Brown went too far. It overreached in trying to correct segregation. Well, that's enough, again, for one of these anti-civil rights advocates to repeat and then try to use against the Brown case. That's enough. I mean, I can already see anti-civil rights advocates taking that language and putting it in one of their briefs to argue against the Brown case. I can already see that happening. And he said other things about Brown. So that's how he equips anti-civil rights opponents, anti-civil rights advocates, lawyers, judges, etc., to fight the civil rights movement, civil rights legislation. All right, so it is the reason why I'm saying that Justice Thomas has been a total menace to civil rights on the court. And it's all the more reason why I said, and you got to remember, if we lose civil rights, then it's going to be hard for us to demand civil rights. If we lose equal rights, it's going to be hard for us to demand economic rights. So, as we, again, celebrate Juneteenth, remember the best way to celebrate Juneteenth is by protecting civil rights. Strong civil rights enables us to demand economic rights and civil rights. All right? So, I'm going to do some other videos on Juneteenth leading up to the Juneteenth holiday. And I'm going to focus rather sharply on economics. All right, economics and how civil rights and economics kind of work together. I do that every year around Juneteenth. I talk about economics, reparations, and so on. All right, so make sure you watch every video, watch till the end. I know it's longer than 5 minutes or 10 minutes, what some of you all are accustomed to, but hopefully you get value when you watch our videos. All right, because again, we're teaching you. We're not just YouTubing and putting up content to get clicks and subscribers. We're literally trying to educate you. All right. I am Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you the next time. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, click the bell. All of that helps us get the word out. Until the next time, peace.